Good morning and welcome to the Filtration Hour. My name is Mitch McCreary. I'm the Director of Marketing at the World Filtration Institute. We are honored to have 5 distinguished international panelists and experts with us today to discuss our topic. The World Filtration Institute is a global nonprofit organization. Our mission is to support the growth of the global filtration industry. We are here to advance the sciences and technologies of filtration and separation processes for a clean, healthy, and sustainable world. We proudly support the industry with the most comprehensive, cost-effective, and time-efficient and flexible education program called the Certified Filtration and Separation Specialist, short for CFSS. It covers the filtration market, filtration media and technologies, filter design, testing, evaluation, and new developments and trends, and also opportunities. Here are a list of this year's CFSS program. It covers over 30 different topics in filtration. Besides the professional specialist training, Filtration Hour is another exciting education program we offer to the public. Have a filtration question? Ask the experts at the Filtration Hour. Stay connected and updated. It's free. Today, we will discuss Filtration Innovations for Sustainable Urban Development, hosted by Dr. Iyad Al-Attar. Now, let me introduce our panel of distinguished speakers. First, Nick Agopian. He's president of Reviveaire. Susanna Vidakovic, director, global marketing, mobility, and industrial filtration at Hollingsworth and Vos. Dr. John McKeon is the CEO of Reviveaire. And then we have Richard Lydon, Secretary General of the UK Filtration Society, and Jennifer Nelson, Filtration Product Specialist, focusing on innovative emerging technologies in air filtration. Now, let's talk about a little housekeeping. The session will be approximately 90 minutes long, broken into 2 parts, each about 45 minutes. The first section will have a Q&A with the panelists, and then we'll have a break. And then the second session will have a Q&A with the audience to the panelists. So now, without further ado, our host, Dr. Iyad Al-Attar, with a brief talk to get us started.
Thank you, Mitch. And appreciate the lovely introduction. I want to welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and evening. I know we're in different time zones. Also, I want to extend my sincere appreciation to the panelists. I know they're very busy, but they agreed to avail themselves today to hopefully get some questions answered regarding this timely topic. Today, we're going to be talking about cities. And basically, cities compete for people. And people, us, compete for prosperity. If we consider the rapid urbanization in terms of growth, early 1800s, only 5% of us lived in an urban area. Today, we're 54, expected to be 68% by 2050. Now, what does that mean? It means 2.5 billion people will be added to the urban environment. To get a feel of this, let me take you to the world meter today to look at the population. For example, today we had 273,000 people born. If you look at how fast the population growth is going in that direction, we certainly need to address how we can achieve a lot more with a lot less in terms of reducing waste, reducing the way we generate and use power. So We seem to be urbanizing, and I'm just using those two cities just to show you very quickly what has happened during I would consider a short period of time in terms of urbanization. What does that mean in terms of cities, in terms of clustering people in an urban environment? Where is air quality in all this urbanization? Is it a lens? Is it an ad hoc? Is it a common denominator? I think this is why we're here today, to discuss the kind of pollution we do as we generate power, as we use it. We have other issues in terms of pollution and emissions. We have various pollutants, particulates, bioaerosols, and gases. And of course, we have sandstorms and wildfires and pandemics. This is a tremendous homework. If you just sit back and think filtration is going to easily do that, I think we have to think back and reflect on the so-called low-hanging fruit called air filtration technologies. So every breath is estimated to be half a liter. So we need to know what is in that half a liter, that we sort of need to clean it up to make sure it's suitable for our respiratory system and therefore for our health and well-being. And certainly we need to look at what cities can do. Cities need to take urgent action to bring air quality to the forefront of its priorities. So it's not just a last minute concern, but it's a pillar of how urban development can become sustainable. Nobody would want to render a urban development sustainable if they get sick all the time, they lose productivity, and then they strain the healthcare systems. So we need to tackle climate breakdown. We need to improve indoor air quality and air quality in general. And of course, we need that clean and green environment so cities can be resilient. I just want to shock you a little bit by telling you, out of the almost 7 million premature deaths, which is a huge number, reports show that 3.6 million deaths due to fossil fuel combustion. And sometimes I call it fossil fuel addiction. 91% of this premature death happens in a low to middle income countries. And now about 50 countries are making ambitious plans to go ahead and do something about air quality. So this is what usually happens. You have so much pollution and we easily jump on the filtration wagon thinking that no problem. If you got a pollution problem, we got a filtration remedy for it. But this is not the case, because this is not sustainable. We're consuming a lot of resources. And if we're over consuming, therefore we're probably also overproducing. And if you have this wide array of pollutants, almost like a menu, how much would you really want to squeeze in a filter, whether it's a sustainable transport, an air conditioning system at home, or a healthcare system that entertains multi-stage filtration? While filtration is a tool for us, we need to consider also its disposal. As I said, if you're overproducing, you're over-consuming, and the other way around. And then again, where are you going to dispose these loaded filters are? Is it going to be in my neighborhood? You're going to get all the MPs talking to you and saying, well, not in my backyard. Balding Kenneth spoke about the bathtub curve, which I think it's very relevant here, because if we continue with the influx and the current outflux of pollution, we're not going to have a sustainable planet, and we're not going to have a sustainable way of living. C40 is another initiative where 40 countries and their cities sort of granted air quality the attention it deserves. And basically, the aim is to grant our planet time and resources to regenerate itself. Pollution costs about 5 trillion per year out of losses, productivity, healthcare, and just to remedy the situation in terms of economic and social costs. How are we going to deal with the fact that we're heating and polluting the environment? And how are we going to go back, air condition that, filter the pollutants so that we render the air fit to occupy? Why are we designing cities for people, but then we construct them for cars? What is the street equity in terms of walking and cycling? And again, we have, remember that number because it's so tremendous. 5 trillion people is the economic cost of air pollution. So if he care about outdoor air quality, well, that's okay. If he can't afford a mask, then pretty much the argument is solved. But if I cannot afford one, then we have another argument to discuss. Who's the assumed user for this mask? Who's the assumed user for advanced filtration? Who can afford it? If I'm outdoor and I cannot afford the system, my indoor air quality is the same as outdoor air quality. If I'm one of those lucky few, then my indoor air quality will certainly differ. Now, is this a solution that we can basically extrapolate for all our users? So do we look for buildings that are just good looking or buildings that are good for us in terms of health and well-being? Ironically, sometimes you go to somebody who can afford the best air handling unit and the best filtration system, but then we still have contamination. So, also they inhale poor air quality, and the contamination of their indoor system is as bad as you can see. This is a biofilm of one of the cooling coils, and as you can see, it's heavily contaminated, not only the coil, the duct, and the diffusers, and obviously the respiratory system of the human occupant. This interesting video to see that the water accumulation and then how the poor filtration eventually led to contaminated systems. So if we speak about energy efficiency, we also need to speak about a entire sort of spectrum of issues where we can come up with the sort of consistent performance. So let me put this argument forward. If the air filter performance is inconsistent and deviates from that predicted by laboratory results coming from manufacturers, if filter media is inhomogeneous, if standards are still not that perfect, but still impacted by pandemics and wildfires, it's very difficult to govern all these issues. It's almost like moving targets. So what do we look for when we have cities? Certainly, we do not want to cluster people in contaminated building envelopes. So we need to make sure we tailor our filtration. We put filters and filtration and air quality from day one of city design and urban planning. Whether it's pandemics, wildfires, we cannot allow our cities to reach a level where we are reactive rather than active. What is our future look? What do we look for? How much artificial intelligence do we want to involve? Can control do it alone in terms of air quality and send the right signals to air handling units and systems to respond not only to indoor air quality, but variation in human occupancy? So how do we take charge to change? First, by looking at the fact that we're wrong. We could be wrong. There's more than one way of doing the right thing, but we need to think of innovative ways. Admitting we're wrong is a very good start to turn the table on its head and start to think of system thinking. How is the entire system will think, not only within the HVAC system, but also within the city design, the building design, and also how much social change we want to introduce to make sure we understand not only the changes we require as a community to go forward, but to understand the nonlinear relationships that we have between city to equipment and building to occupants and the entire cycle. I hear this all the time. Pollution is inexpensive. It's okay to pollute. It's not as expensive as filtration. But this is one myth we're going to clear up today. And again, we've polluted so much until we broke our climate. And now we have to fix not only our climate, but we have to fix our relationship with the environment and our planet. This in hopes that we embrace sustainability. And this is a core undertaking. And one message I want to send you today is, what are we getting today from our planet versus what can our planet become tomorrow? So we're only occupying 2% of our Earth surface, but we have many challenges to face and changes to make. Of course, it's time for realignments, and this is the topic of today's Filtration Hour. Realignments, not only intentions, not only technologies, but we also need the conditions and the governance and the finance. Most importantly, today, we're going to talk about the leadership required to move forward. Part of the leadership is to talk about technologies and how can we bridge the gap. If the government requires less than the technology can deliver, then we can train and make awareness programs to raise the bar. If the other way around, then we have research funds that we can ask for so that we are all at the same page, speaking the same language. Ladies and gentlemen, most important part is to bridge the gaps, bring the leadership. And part of the leadership that WFI does today is bringing the experts to talk about what can be done, how can we collectively face our challenges so that we can all embrace sustainability and have a city not only safe, sustainable, but also healthy to dwell and live in. And at this point, back to Mitch.
Thanks. Very good, Iyad. Thank you very much for that enlightening presentation. I appreciate it. So now let's get this discussion started. John, I just wanted to kind of ask you in kind of relation to Iyad's presentation, how can we effectively communicate the importance of IAQ to policymakers, urban planners, and the general public? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And thank you for the opportunity to address Filtration Hour. I know a lot of work has gone in behind the scenes with Christine and her team and Iyad. I know you've done a lot of work on this. So it's really a privilege to be here and to join the conversation, particularly as a clinician. I'm an emergency room doctor, and joining the dots between the technology and the thought leadership on the call and on the panel, and then the human outcomes, which is where I see patients in the emergency room. And I initially got very interested between that connection between the built environment and children with asthma and allergy, and having allergy flare-ups and coming to the emergency room and being asked by the parents, what can we do to stay well, rather than you treating us when we come to the emergency room. And I think that's what I would like to talk about, answering your question about, is joining the dots. And Iyad had a very good slide. I love the idea that the concept that pollution is cheap. Somebody else doesn't pay for it. We're polluting rivers in a different country, so we can land products here and buy them at a certain price. But really, you're not actually putting on that profit and loss of that balance sheet. Somewhere, somebody's paying the true cost of that product to be cheap, because we're just not billing them for pollution. I think joining the dots is what policymakers need to do, particularly where it comes to the built environment and cities and housing, because building cheap and shoddy houses that get mold and poor indoor air quality is not cheap. It may be cheap on that 1 year of your capex on your housing budget, but if you take an actuarial 5-year P&L view of the world, profit and loss, you're going to be paying for that, inverted commas, cheap housing for years and years with healthcare bills and so forth. So it's similar to Iyad's kind of planetary pollution. Somebody is paying, we're just not seeing immediately. And that's happening with poor indoor air quality on health effects. Your own ex-Surgeon General called Jerome Adams had an excellent slide on this, that in America, they're spending about 20% of their GDP, 4 trillion, on health impacts and treating the downstream consequences when people become ill, on rescue medication and treating the symptoms. But the research shows that 75% of your health outcomes are related to your built environment, where you live, and your behaviors, what we talk about, the social determinants of health. We're beginning to realize in the US that this $4 trillion, it's not sustainable. We've got to start moving some of that investment in health and treating sickness. And Jerome Adams, not my words, your own Surgeon General, says you don't have a healthcare system in America. You have a sickness reimbursement program. And that's not sustainable. So that 4 trillion has to move upstream to that 75% that we know has impact on health outcomes. And I'm absolutely convinced that relates to indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality, the built environment, how we build our cities, and so forth. And I'll just kind of finish this section on stealing some words from Dr. Gupta, who was the keynote at the American Institute of Architects annual meeting last year. And they actually changed part of their resolution to say it's part of an architect's role now to design for health and well-being. And what Dr. Gupta said is, look, we've got to stop spending all this money on heroically pulling people out of the fires with precision medicine, precision cancer medicine, obesity drugs, and so forth, and stop people falling into the fire in the first place. And I think the role of architects, the designers of our cities, the people who are tasked with healthy indoor environments, indoor air quality, indoor environmental quality, they really need to play a role in this conversation.
Thanks very much for your input there, John. I agree. People do tend to look at just what's in front of their face and not necessarily the whole picture. So, Nick, would you like to comment on that question as well?
Yes, thank you very much, Mitch, and thank you for WFI, and what an amazing group of people to be speaking with. I'm going to jump right into this because we don't have that much time. There are three stakeholders. You've got policymakers, you've got urban planners, and you've got the general public. Now, the policymakers need to get more involved immediately, but they have to be motivated somehow. And I really appreciate what John just depicted in his metrics. You know, I'm going to give a little bit of of some history here. I talk to some people because I sit on technical committees with ASHRAE, and we do have the code people there as well. And we do go, I myself go to Washington once in a while, and I try to lobby on the importance of everything Iyad and John just spoke about. And what I hear sometimes is, I don't understand this. We've never had this problem before. And I think the common denominator here, or what's going on, is something that occurred back towards 1980 or in the late 70s, and that's the oil embargo. And let me elaborate a little bit on this. During that time, there was a lot of emphasis to say we need to conserve energy back then. And there was a lot of effort put onto the civil construction technology. But there was nothing that was focused on the mechanical systems indoors. And today, decades later, the civil construction methodology has evolved to a point where there is such a distinct separation between indoor air and outdoor air that you're almost in a hermetically sealed box. And when we used to design filtration and ventilation systems back then, we never took into consideration how leaky windows were, how leaky walls or interface point between walls, floors, or walls and ceilings, and of course, doors. So there was a lot more air exchange back then than we had today. But the standards that we have today, whether again it's on ventilation or more specifically on filtration, because to my absolute shock, until a few years ago, the standards that ASHRAE here, at least in the United States, wrote for filtration was to protect cooling coils. There was an absolute disregard towards human health. So trying to go to policymakers and to what John said, and again, I absolutely love what he mentioned, is what are the costs associated to this? And it can't be singular in nature. It has to be, yes, we have to go to the policymakers, and yes, we have to have the general public push on this. But it reminds me of something that was a light bulb that went off in my head when John said profit and loss. I kind of feel that this initiative that we all have has to run like a business, meaning that there has to be a component of this that I'm going to label as sales and marketing. And the reason I'm saying this is under standard 62.2 in the United States, I was absolutely shocked that about 15% or 20, at max 20% of the states have adopted the code into code what standard 62.2 depicts. So we have a division between what people like on this panel and all of our delegates are listening to that understand the problem and then operationalizing it. And I think we all understand the problem, but we're not communicating it correctly to, as I said, the policymakers, the urban planners, and the general public today. And we need to put more effort in doing that and disseminating it, because I kind of feel it's the best kept secret in the world.
Thanks
you,
a lot. Appreciate that. Suzanne, do you have any input on that question as well?
Well, thank you, Mitch, and greetings, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and talk about this very interesting topic, and of course, happy to be amongst such great panelists. And I really like what both John and Nick said. That's totally to the point. Recently, I read some studies where it says that somewhere over 50% of people do not feel well informed when it comes to indoor air quality or air quality itself. And then in the same study, the discussion went into that over 70% of people want scientific data and want scientists to be part of policymaking and involved in political decision making. You can find the answer to this question. So people want data. There's a lot of data out there, but what's missing? There's an overflow. There's too many sources, all kinds of sources. Some are trustworthy, some are not. So people still want trustworthy stakeholders to talk about this topic. And then there's the question: what do we do with the information that we have? And I believe, let's say if we're talking about general public, we have to go to storytelling. We have to change the way that we present the data. We have to move from the geeky scientific language. We have to make it fluent to people. Again, I use the word storytelling to make it understandable and relatable, and above all, make it useful. And then if we look at the bigger picture and we say, how do we talk to policy, how do we communicate to policymakers, to urban planners, to the general public? I also believe it's very important to understand that these are different focus groups. You're not going to use the same language to talk to them. You're not going to use the same formats. You have to develop specific formats to address these very specific focus groups. And then you, of course, have to pick the relevant timing. When do we talk about, let's say, allergies? When do we talk about the fires that we recently had in the US? And then, of course, last but not least, what are the proper channels? We can't hit everyone with a scientific paper, but we also cannot use Twitter or social media to talk to everyone. So it has to be a lineup in between the groups, the channels, the message that we want to convey, and how do we make storytelling out of scientific data. And at the end, to conclude, the goal should be to really inspire and move people to action. And I believe that can happen if there is a proven benefit, whether it's a health benefit or if there's a financial benefit, again, depending on who you target.
Very, very good. Thanks, Susanna. Yeah, it is kind of interesting to try and figure out how and when to motivate the public in order to, to actually push some of these things through. So, Jennifer, I have a question for you, and that is, what are the economic and social benefits of investing in improved IAQ?
Oh, thanks. All the other panelists as well, and they've pretty well covered some of this topic. But let's just back up a little bit and speak about what we know. So we know that we all spend at least 90% of our time inside, and let me tell you, I've spent about 100% of my time inside the last few days, considering we had 70 centimeters of snow in 2 days. So, sorry. Oh, anyways, so yeah, as we know, that poor indoor air quality is linked to a range of economical and social challenges, from rising healthcare costs that's been spoken about to lower workplace productivity. So economically, investing in better indoor air quality is a game changer, and socially, the benefits are even greater if they can be implemented properly. So investing in improved air quality offers a wide range of economic and social benefits. For example, some of the economic benefits are reduced healthcare costs, that has been mentioned, by lowering medical expenses, such as respiratory illnesses and allergies. They can decrease the overall burden on the healthcare systems. So another thing is fewer emergency visits. Increased productivity and workforce efficiency, fewer sick days, enhanced cognitive function. Studies have linked cleaner air to improved concentration and cognitive performance, leading to better decision-making and concentration and increased efficiency in work environments. So there's a few things that the economic benefits are. Also, growth and creation of new markets and technologies. Investing in indoor air quality stimulates the development of innovative products and technologies, such as advanced filtration systems, air quality monitoring devices, and green building materials. There's also job opportunities. The expansion of industries focused on improving indoor air quality, ranging from like construction, retrofitting, environmental monitoring. They can create new jobs and spur economic growth activity, particularly in sections like sustainable building design and maintenance. This is something that we are dealing with right now in Canada. A lot of our buildings are going under retrofits and recommissioning buildings. Now is the time to implement some of these economic benefits. So let's hope that's what they do. Some of the social benefits, let's say, improved public health and quality of life. There's, better well-being and reduced health disparities, enhanced educational outcomes. We know that it's a better learning environment with long-term benefits by improving our indoor air quality. Strengthening community resilience, by addressing the disparities in indoor air quality, especially in marginalized and low-income communities. Investments in indoor air quality can reduce health inequities and promote environmental justice. So there's a lot of things that we can do economically and socially. So investing in improved indoor air quality is not just a matter of public health, but it's a strategic economic and social investment.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer.
Welcome.
Thank you. Richard, do you have something to add to that as well?
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. I think, and just adding to Jennifer's comments there with regard to buildings in general, we are as a society moving towards cities, and Iyad mentioned that by 2050, 68% of us on the planet will be living in cities. And the other thing is the industry itself, the industry as a whole, from previous meetings we've had, is around 350 billion industry between IAQ, IEQ as well, if we consider indoor environmental quality as well. And our buildings should, I believe, becoming more healthier. We have the technology today to build the buildings, to make the buildings, but this requires the joined up thinking, I think, that John mentioned. We have the tools, we have the capability to do this today. I think the challenge is the mindset, the planning and the design that's required in our cities going forward, in our urban and built environments, and the solutions then that might derive from that. And that will bring economic benefits. I think the other thing is buildings are becoming more insulated, of course, and there exacerbates the problem with older stock of buildings that we live in today. We all know that poor ventilation in buildings leads to buildup of VOCs, CO2. John mentioned also about poor housing, maybe cheap housing. Damp and mold, which we don't really talk about much, has huge health problems and adds to the health crisis that we've got today. And not forgetting, of course, harmful things like formaldehyde. In general, the statistics are indoor air quality is 5 times more polluting than outdoor air quality as it exists today in poorer buildings. So designing for proper ventilation, I think, is key. And of course, all this will have social benefits in terms of less pressure on health services, less pressure on health systems. I think we have the ability to build these systems today and improve these systems. and they have massive economic benefits. For every dollar we spend on better air quality, $47 is returned for better health benefits. So just to give an idea of stats, it's by far one of the greatest benefits we can get for every dollar we spend if we actually improve this for society in general. That's it from me, Mitch. You want to hand it over to someone else?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I do think there was a good point there. You were talking about retrofitting buildings. I think it is kind of interesting that it would be nice to see the figures on how much it would cost to retrofit some of those buildings as well. Sometimes you don't know whether it's worth tearing it down and starting over again, or retrofitting a building and trying to keep the existing structure. So anyway, Iyad, would you add some? Do you have some comment on that?
Yeah, sure. And let me also extend my sincere appreciation to you, Mitch, for allowing me to be the last to answer this question, because now I've collected insights from everyone. I think Richard is right. And, there's so much to do from a building lens, but I also believe there is so much to do from a city lens. I often hear this, the government should do this and that. Governments aren't going to give us clean and fresh air. Technology will be able to do that. And this is why I had an important slide in my presentation. We got two scenarios to deal with here. Either governments have very modest expectations for the buildings and the cities, which means technologies and industries and industry leaders should come forward and say, look, we can exceed and meet and exceed these modest requirement, so what we elevate the bar. Or the government is ahead of the game and say, look, I want the indoor air quality to be way beyond, the conventional. I think we need to address that. I think we have an issue that, we're driven by pandemics and wildfires. And I don't want to be critical here, but certain governments, the only tactic they have is lockdown, which didn't prove functional. Now, let me go back to a point that Nick mentioned. I think it's a very critical point. When you look at filtration for example, HVAC equipment, they were there just to protect the equipment, because I hardly believe a two-stage filtration with 1 inch thick pre-filter will do any good for any respiratory system. Next point would be, we have no control over human occupancy, whether it's school, office. I can just crowd and cluster as many employees and students as possible. Here is government where governments can play a role. Here where governments can, say, well, if you want to have a building certified and you want to win an indoor air quality award, you have to have an air quality monitoring system, that you do that and you share the data, with us. I think the air quality cause, it's almost lost post-pandemic, and we got back into, the daily activities that we've been doing. So what we need to do, I think we need to almost start from scratch, turn the table on its head and say, let's do it. I know in certain countries in Europe, retrofitting would be very difficult because you cannot even, bang a nail in a wall. So how am I going to go install an HVAC system that will accommodate multi-stage filtration? And if we zoom out totally, why is our filtration system going to be so big and so thick and multi-stage filtration? This is because we have been polluting and we continue to pollute so much. We have a broken climate. We have to fix our relationship with the climate. And we've seen when we had lockdowns, the anthropogenic pollution went down. So that's a clear message that there's something needs to be done in the background. Mitch?
Okay, thanks, Iyad. I agree with you. So I do have another couple more questions here before we have the break. How can we ensure equitable access to clean air and healthy indoor air environments for all residents, regardless of socioeconomic status? Nick, do you have some input on that?
Oof, what a question. And I absolutely do. I'd like to give another little story. I bid on an EPA grant to monitor IAQ in schools for underprivileged children in the New Jersey area. And prior to applying, we inspected some of the schools just to understand exactly what we're going to be getting into. I literally went to the EPA inspector and I asked him, I said, are you serious? Do you really want to spend the money? Because it's pretty evident. Ladies and gentlemen, there was black mold on the walls of these classrooms. I went into one area where I literally gagged. That's how bad the environment was. It's absolutely shocking to see the division between some of the newer schools and privileged areas as compared to some of the places that are underprivileged. And we now know, and from science, that our brains are monitoring the environment that we're in. And our brains are focusing our energy, whether it's brain power or whatever, in attacking whatever the environment is doing to our bodies. For example, we know that while we sleep, if the air is polluted, we can't get into REM. If it's too hot, we can't get into REM. If it's too humid, we can't get into REM. If we're smelling something, we can't get into REM, and we don't sleep well. So our bodies have a direct impact to the environment that we're in. So when you have places with various socioeconomic status, and they're exposed to some of these environments, I can understand aggression that can come out of it. And there are studies that show that accordingly. And the problem that we have is, again, to what I was saying earlier, is we don't have enough policy, but more importantly, we don't have enough regulation. Because we have the standards, we have the science, and even if we do get the policy out there, how do we regulate it? And regulation is something that needs to be discussed moving forward. And we have to have somebody that's going to come in, that's going to say, you're at fault here, or you need to do this. I'm going to mention something right now, and it's not good, bad, or indifferent, but we have the LEED system. And you can get LEED points. And as an example, if you install a bike rack, you get a LEED point, or if you do this, you get that, or whatever the case may be. And an engineer can classify a building, and then they get a plaque, silver, gold, whatever the case may be. But then that's the end of it. And that plaque stays on the building, even if you remove that bike rack. Unlike the well system, the well building system, where yes, you can get well points and you can get a certificate or a plaque in the front of your building, but you never own that, because well will regulate what you're doing, meaning you have to service the systems and you have to submit your service plan and the outcome and so on and so forth, because there's a regulation. So regulation has to be part of the equation that is lacking everywhere, in fact, because we design buildings, we have codes, we have standards, and we build accordingly. And then once that's done and we operationalize the building, people walk away. And then we end up with problems. And Dr. Iyad showed us a depiction of some of the filters and cooling coils out there. So again, I'm harping on regulation, but I think regulation needs to be looked at.
Okay.
In addition, sorry, I just want to mention a couple of things. There are grants and there is funding from both private and public. Unfortunately, we don't have a system in place to be able to offer, we'll just call it again, underprivileged people these grants. They're trying to put a roof over their head. They're trying to put food on the table for their children or for themselves. So with these grants and funding that's available, I think we need to enforce or try to help some of these people moving forward, because again, I'm not sure who said it, the actual costs associated to poor indoor air quality and health is not just on people, but it's on the structures themselves, and then the cost of maintaining those structures and the upkeep. So I don't think we truly understand the full extent of what these costs are. But if we did, then we'd understand that, yes, we have to look at everybody equally and apply it accordingly. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Nick. We have a question from the audience here. I just want to, before we go here, John, just one moment. Maybe you can address this question.
Just refresh me, Mitch, on there was a lot in that to unpack. It's about return on investment or numbers. What?
Yeah, I think there's one here that's which IAQ standard should be followed to ensure accurate and up-to-date quality assessments. Do you have any idea?
Is that for me?
Yes, could we?
Yeah, just want to just pick up on some points that Nick made there.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Yeah, just about kind of return on investment, because it's something that you often hear about. If something sounds good for the planet or sustainable, it sounds expensive, and something's going to be good for people, it's going to be expensive. But I think we really can have this strategy of what I call the 3 Ps. It's good for the planet, so it's sustainable. It's good for business, so it's profitable. But it's also healthy, so it's good for people. And I think that's the paradigm shift that I spoke about. That it's no longer going to be acceptable. Nick mentioned about the energy crisis when we seal buildings up, and we started seeing the first episodes of building-related illness. Because if you tackle any aspect of it, whether it's energy efficiency or ventilation levels, then you're going to impact on material science. So there's very much this kind of trifecta or joined up integrated building management. And all building management systems will need to look at operational carbon, energy, and also people, but also be good for business. And generally, when you look at metrics, we kind of consider the hard metrics being energy. We can get a number on that, and we can get an operational efficiency number on retrofits. And then the kind of softer metrics are people and well-being, and that's kind of nice to have stuff. I spoke earlier about things flipping over. I think there's going to be a flip there, that energy metrics are going to be table stakes. Building deep retrofits will be just what you need to do for operational carbon. But the hard metrics and the value add metrics for building owners and operators will be the people metrics. How are people feeling in that building? One of the earlier speakers mentioned about cognitive benefits and so forth. So I think we need to get much tighter on human impact metrics. And Joe Allen speaks a lot about this, that if you look at any business, generally your overhead of energy and heating the building is going to be about 10%. But your people are often 50% of your costs within a company. So if you save 10% or 20% of your energy bills, that's 20% of 10%, which is 2%. But if that means then your workers, and we're not all like in Victorian factories pulling levers anymore, we're now knowledge workers using our brains and IP and creating value by thinking. Therefore, if you're impacting on that 50%, it's a false equation. And what you saved on energy, you're now losing on the people, the key hires. And we hear about this war for talent. How do we get people back into the workplace when they're there? How do we get them engaged? We spend all this money on good food and cycling to your building and having a shower and reflection rooms and meditation rooms and prayer rooms. Well, fundamentally, what about the indoor air quality and what we have there? So I think there's a lot of conversations to have around metrics in that area. And then broadly, I see it breaking into 2 areas. You've either got the high performance buildings like the blue chips, the Googles and the banks, and that they really want to have top quality indoor air quality as a value proposition to get people to come and work in those buildings. Or you see at the exact opposite end of the spectrum, which is the underserved community, and you're seeing mold and black mold and the stuff that Nick was talking about. And again, we've gone into underserved homes, and we've got 100-to-1 ROI on doing remediation of mold, putting in air cleaners, improving the indoor environment, and then looking at health economic assessments. And I'll finish on, people may or may not be familiar with the Ella Roberta Foundation in the UK. There was a young girl, I think she's 10 or 12 years old, and it was a global first that the coroner put down that the cause of death was air pollution. So I think people are beginning to look more and more, and it's a horrible way to look at it, just metrics and human lives, but they are putting much more, turning up the microscope on health economic assessments as it relates to the built environment. Nick, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'd like to add something to that, and thank you for that, John. We have a severe cognitive dissonance in understanding what is in indoor air, because if we can't see, smell, taste, or touch something, we don't believe it's there. But the pandemic has shown us that there could be something in there that could kill you in 2 weeks. Now, to answer specifically the question that was asked, understanding indoor air quality is so variable because each one of us will interact with it differently. However, using DALI and understanding the impacts of indoor air quality with DALI, which is disability adjusted life year, and this is something that we use in ASHRAE in all of the committees in understanding as we move forward in standards, what should the numbers be? And we used to think, we know that radon is bad for us. We know formaldehyde is bad for us. But when you look at the DALI calculations and the number of illnesses and deaths that we get from radon, the number is 34. When we look at formaldehyde, the number is like around 50. When we look at PM 2.5, particle matter, 2.5 micron, the number is 1,600. It's absolutely crazy. So now we realize that what we thought was acceptable as indoor air quality based on things like OSHA and NIOSH and all of these, and the EPA that put out numbers where they take people and they expose them to different types of contaminants, and they say, okay, you should not be above this level. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that that's good indoor air quality. All that means is that, you're going to get illnesses if you are at that level. Some of the discussions that are going on in some groups in ASHRAE, at least, which is in the United States, is that whatever numbers we have out there, at most, to start on proper indoor air quality, the concentrations have to be 1/10, a tenth of what's published out there, especially if it's OSHA or NIOSH and so on and so forth. 1/10, and that's the start. Some people say it should be 1%. The value for good indoor air quality should be 1% of what these numbers are that are published out there for people to look at. And again, that's just the start. Thank you.
Great, Nick. Thanks a lot. We're going to take a quick break here and come back to this question right after the break. Alrighty. So here we are. We're back. Let's go back to that last question for a minute, and I just want to restate it again. How can we ensure equitable access to clean air and a healthy indoor environment for all residents, regardless of socioeconomic status? Suzanne, could you wrap that question up for us?
Sure, thank you, Mitch. So today, over 1 billion people actually live in some kind of informal settlements or slums. So I think it's obvious there has to be an integrated approach. We have a framework there, which is governance, financing, and urban planning. So that's the framework. The tools to use there is build more green areas, look into housing and construction, definitely look into mobility and transportation, because that adds for over a quarter of all the pollution in urban areas. Surely waste management and water. And then, so these would be the tools. And then we have the groups we need to talk to. We definitely need to highlight these inequalities. And the group to talk to, again, talking about the focus groups and communication that I started with today. So we have policymakers we need to talk to. We have the government we need to talk to, civil society, the private sector, the research sector, the scientists. The question is, of course, how do you highlight that to these different groups? And to what Iyad said previously, we cannot expect the government to solve all of our problems and take that top-down approach. What I would like to see more is something that actually Nick touched earlier when he talked about the schools and the actual horror that he has seen there, which is informing and talking to the policymakers at the local level. I strongly believe that the change has to happen and start at the local level. Just to give you an example, it could be local in terms of policymakers or local governments, but it could also be something like organizations. We know that people can work within companies where they have jobs which expose them to greater air pollution. Let's start that there. What can we do there? Personal protection equipment, filtration systems. So how can we on a micro level, on a smaller scale, start and build it up from there? I strongly believe in starting from here and starting from local.
Great. I think that's some good points, Suzanne. Very good points. We do have several questions from the audience, and I just wanted to kind of bring those to the front here, since we do want to address those questions. We do have one here, and you know, one of the statements from this attendee is that there's a profound knowledge gap between those of us that know and those of us that don't know. How do we bridge that gap? Until we do so, we're really going to we're not going to make any dent at all. And Jennifer, I'd like to ask you to answer that question.
Thanks, Mitch. You know, I was listening to the other panelists talking about education and how we can educate the schools, especially with indoor air quality. That is an issue. Educating is always going to be an issue, talking to any of the people that are interested in indoor air quality. I was looking at just in our own province alone, for example, we have over 2,700 portable classrooms, and we're adding more every day. I have approached the portable classrooms themselves, the manufacturers, for them to implement indoor air quality, some portable unit, and they don't do it because of costs. So where do we start the education? Do we go to the education school level? Do we go to the school boards and say, you know, if you're going to implement these portable classrooms, especially in marginalized areas, we have to make sure that because they're a small enclosed area, that we take care of the indoor air quality. Look, if we can't even do it in a small portable room, how are we supposed to do it into a full school? Anyways, that's my issue, is education is huge, and we have to start somewhere. So in my case, I would say let's start at the school board and talk to them about this problem they have, that just portable classrooms alone. I think there's over 600,000 of those in the United States. So you can imagine the issue. Education, 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 both in our educational systems and to our governments and to our policymakers. It's all education, and that's the only way we're going to get forward with this.
Mitch, I have a quick comment just based on what Jen, and also the question is great, I think, by Mr. Andrew. I'm recently involved in a construction and you know, a building of a hospital, design and a building for a hospital. And when you look at the equipment selection, you know, you're almost waiting to see that indoor air quality sweet spot where and now air quality is going to come up, and now air quality is going to come up. Neither air quality came up as a point, nor filtration came up as a point. You know, we're always been discussing that, you know, filtration isn't what's ailing indoor air quality alone. You know, there are other parameters, the underlying parameters contributing to that. But when I said, oh, you know, how about indoor air quality? And they said, well, you know, it's all based on filtration. And I said, how about filtration? Even filtration was not addressed. Well, we leave it to the manufacturer. They know what to do. I think what we need is to kind of reinvent the way we look at buildings. And this is a hospital, it's a critical application. We go back to the point that Nick mentioned. What are you looking after? What are you looking to achieve? Are you equipment sensitive, or are you equipment and occupant sensitive? Right now, we have to reject that notion that if I put a thin filter with, you know, 2 particulate stage filtration, I'm off the hook. It's going to exonerate me somehow that I've done my filtration and indoor air quality homework. What we need really is we need to specify this from the very beginning and balance this with continuous monitoring. Without continuous monitoring, I think Andrew's point is right. It's just going to be a gap between, you know, I'm able to do something so massive and it's not a requirement, so it's going to stay on the shelf.
Okay, thanks, Iyad. Appreciate that.
Mitch, can I, can I add to that just a little bit? One
Sure,
more
Richard.
point there. The WFI run courses during the year, and knowledge is important. And I think, you know, if Andrew or anyone out there wants to gain more knowledge, I think the WFI covers more than half, I think, in air. And yeah, thank you for putting that up. Out of the 32 courses, there's quite a lot of them there based on air. So that could be very interesting. You know, everything from, as Iyad just mentioned, air filtration for hospitals, but air filtration for all sorts of buildings and outdoor indoor environments will be covered there, including all the phases of the technologies that operate. The other thing is, I think there's maybe a shift needed in terms of regulation and legislation per state, per region, and we kind of pass air on. You know, air is part of the earth, so we share all this air that exists. So I think there has to be a mindset shift, I said earlier, in terms of how we adopt and change the mindset of technology providers, technology makers, but also implementers of technologies globally, to make sure we cover the aspects of you know, not just equality, but also cleaner air for everyone.
Okay, thanks, Richard.
Mitch, can I jump in there as well, please?
Sure, yeah.
Because I think this concept of awareness is really, really important. And most of the times, a breakthrough thinking is a kind of a break with traditional thinking. And we're not going to figure this issue out on our own. So, for example, the doctors aren't going to figure these healthcare challenges out on their own. And I'd like to applaud the World Filtration Institute and those educational courses that Richard had up there, because it's going to start with having conversations like we're having today. I think Susanna mentioned about storytelling and how do we make the invisible, like air, visible. And the pandemic has helped to make it a tangible thing that we connect to emotionally. And maybe if I could, just a shameless plug for the Indoor Air and Innovation Research Institute. What we're trying to do in our institute is similar to what WFI are doing in their institute, but we're uniquely trying to bring the voice of the patient and the voice of the doctor. My experience is the architects are over here talking about healthy buildings, ASHRAE are over there, and I'm on the Environmental Health Committee for ASHRAE. You've got BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association, they have a healthy building program. You've WELL and LEED. And you have the facilities management, the people who are cleaning the buildings, and they have their own healthy building programs. So you've got the asset owner, you've got the construction professional, the filtration professionals. But what I'm not seeing enough of is everybody talking together. And that's why I was very, very happy to be on this panel, because you've got different stakeholders, brands, experts, academics, researchers, medical clinicians. And I think more events like you're running today and like we have in our institute is bringing people together and talk about it and break down the silos so we can all achieve this outcome of healthy people living in healthy buildings.
Absolutely, absolutely, John. You addressed that perfectly. I did want to go to kind of bring that to a different question, and I guess maybe this will answer a couple of others that we have from the audience. For Susanna, what do you feel are the biggest filtration challenges and barriers to implementing and effectively fixing IAQ solution or having IAQ solutions? What are your thoughts on that, Suzanne?
Oh, that's a very good question, and we could probably talk about that for the next 3 hours.
Yeah.
So we try to kind of wrap it up. So definitely filtration is an effective tool here, and definitely filtration is something that will and makes the difference today. But let's take it depending on the application. Let's look into buildings. I believe Nick talked about that. If we take buildings, we have, for example, buildings which are older and have outdated ventilation systems. So there you have a barrier. They don't meet modern standards. You're going to have problems with air exchange rates. The energy efficiency is going to be an issue. If we look at modern and new buildings, you're going to have another problem there. And that is what Nick actually mentioned, which is air tightness. The buildings are sealed not to lose energy, warmth, or to control the climate within. That also means increased air pollution. So how do we tackle that? So these are all barriers for filtration. The increased energy use is definitely a problem because that means increased operating costs. Let's say if you're a building manager or a maintenance manager, you're going to be concerned about that. You're going to have, with increased energy costs, larger environmental problems. So how do you tackle this? How do you think about maintenance? And that's why I said it's so important. Who do we talk to and how do we address different issues on filtration? If we have, for example, a maintenance manager, they're going to be concerned about their challenges, which is how often do I change the filter? How do I optimize my HVAC system? All of these are real barriers to filtration. We have to clean the ducts. Let's say in buildings, but also in cars. You can have the best possible filter on a car or on a bus. If your HVAC unit is not clean, it's not going to do much. The other question is, can we monitor? How can that help filtration? So monitor, actually have data indoors, outdoors, have data, so reveal what's out there and then manage. People will have, again, whether it's buildings or in transportation, they're going to have staff priorities and gaps there. So where do I engage people? That's also going to be a barrier to filtration. So limitation in resources. Then we can go to a whole other segment here and talk about difficulties in guidelines. Too many different standards, guidelines, often not understandable, where there are sometimes or often we face inconsistencies in those policies. Then we can talk about not all media is created equal. Not all filters are created equal and will not do the same performance. Then we have, of course, and I think we talked very much about this topic here, awareness and education. If I don't know, I will not care about installing the proper or better filtration system. How do we overcome this? And I think all in all, again, this is a very broad topic, but the goal should here really be action and behavior change. How do we, depending on who we talk to, whether it's occupants in the building, whether it's building managers, maintenance managers, the business owners, how do we move them to change their behavior? How do we take them to or bring them to take proactive steps and actually do something? Iyad, you raise your hand.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think you.
great.
I think Susanna put her finger on a very important point. I've given a few lectures in the past, let's say, year or so, where I have somebody from the audience, apparently either from the government or a policymaker, tells me, hold my hand. We go back to the question that Andrew asked. Tell me, so walk me through it. I wanna see this done. But then Susanna said something that is very, very important. And I mentioned it in my presentation. If filter media is still inhomogeneous, if filter performance is inconsistent, if we're still having discussion about which standard will be applied in which country, and we still have not really perfected ventilation rates, filtration efficiencies and stages and all this. I think there are way too many moving targets to be able to, get things done. So if you're going to go and speak to a decision maker that's going to propel the cause of air quality, and we haven't had our homework being done, because the simple question he or she can ask, okay, so do I embrace this standard or that standard? If I'm in Asia, would that standard be done, implemented, or shall I use a European one? I think we need to have a common denominator here. We need to be on the same page, speaking the same language. I'm sure all of you are aware of the differences that certain standards have in terms of ventilation, filtration, and building environment. But I think there's a lot to be done, not only on filter media and filter design, but also on how we perceive this to be, implemented. My last point is, after you do all this lovely stuff, you give it back to the users and to the consultants and to the contractors. And if poor implementation is there, again, we've missed the mark. So there are too many possibilities to miss the mark. This is why communities, as Jennifer said, and it's a collective sort of homework we need to do to advance the cause of improved indoor air quality. Mitch?
Right. No, I agree.
And Mitch,
That's
if
some
I could
interesting points here. Go ahead. Suzanne, did you have something?
have another question here, that there is a profound knowledge gap between us that know and about the negative impact and the general public. Again, it's really about tailoring the message. If you want to talk to a maintenance manager, you can't go into too many filtration specifics. They're just not going to be interested in that. Try to find out what they're interested in. If we want to go to kindergartens, we're not going to talk about pressure drop to them. So really, the message really has to be tailored, understandable, lean. It has to address what people are concerned about. So I think communication is really an important topic here, and it's really about finding who your focus group is and tailoring the message to them, and also finding the right channel. Again, depending on who you want to talk to, you're not going to use social media or scientific papers or press releases. So this has to be aligned. You can't have one platform and tell the same story to everyone. Then we definitely are going to fail in conveying this message.
Oh, I agree. Can't tell a maintenance man about, regulations and so on and so forth. They're not going to care about it at all. That's for sure. John, do you have an input on that as well? As an emergency room doctor? John?
He's on mute.
I'm on mute. How do you mean, Mitch, with regards to what?
Well, with regards to this, trying to bridge that gap from in various levels of filtration, how to bridge those gaps as far as information and the importance of IAQ.
Yeah, I think the way I would bring it back from a physician, as I describe myself as I'm the why guy. I know why it's really important to get filtration, indoor air quality, whether it's infectious aerosols we're talking about, something like a pandemic, where we're talking about allergens, which are pathogens, they're aeropathogens, but they're non-infectious. They cause pathology or illness through a different inflammatory and allergic response. And then you have VOCs and you have particulates. So there's lots of, let's call it clinically relevant or health and well-being issues related to indoor air quality. But then there's also indoor environmental quality. And we look at our indoor environment, how it's constructed. It could be noise, it could be light, it could be airflow, moisture. There's all sorts of other parameters of the indoor environment that impact on health. Then you also get to this really difficult issue, and we're struggling in the ASHRAE Environmental Health Committee at the moment, that if you are going to develop the indoor environment to promote health and well-being, you must have a definition of what health is, and therefore you can have a standard of indoor air quality that promotes health. And then you can have thresholds and KPIs and targets, and you can start to talk about building configuration and integrated building science. We spoke a little bit earlier about code, but building to code isn't really good enough when we're talking about supporting health and well-being outcomes. I mean, nobody wants to buy a house that we've just built it to code, i.e. it won't fall down, it won't go on fire, there is a fire escape. So we've got to go beyond code to look at health and well-being. And then that gets very difficult, because are we talking about being healthy is just not being sick? And the WHO doesn't define as health as being merely the absence of well-being. It talks about psychological health, emotional health, and physical health. Then you talk about what's the difference between healthy and wellness, and then well-being. Is that just the absence of discomfort? When am I comfortable? When am I stressed? When am I not stressed? So it does become quite difficult. But I think really the important thing is to stick on, as I said, the why guy. Why is this important? And I will educate people about why they need to be switched on. Then you have all the how people, the experts, about how to do it on this call. But there's no doubt that there is a growing hunger for information about how my indoor environment impacts on my health and well-being outcomes.
Okay, great.
And
That's
Mitch,
a
just
very good answer to that question, John. Nick.
Mitch, just add to maybe something that Suzanne said in terms of just the bigger filtration challenge. I think it's wider than just a filtration challenge. I think it's a system thinking that we need to think about, and that's the more important thing. The other thing is we're living with, I mentioned earlier, we're living with old stock of buildings. I mean, if you think of the buildings that we've got now, I'm just here in the UK, you know, most of them, you know, 70% of them are leaking. And they're not fit for the 21st century. And we spend approximately 60 to 70% of the energy we use on the planet within cities. And half of that, roughly, is wasted in various forms. So if we think of buildings of the future, or we think of actually a mechanism for retrofitting existing buildings to make them better, we would dramatically cut the energy on the planet. We would help the health and well-being of society. So there's a win-win situation if we think of it from a system thinking point of view. The other thing is, I think, as well as filtration, we've got all the tools. We've got, you know, the monitors, the sensors nowadays. We've got the tracing mechanisms. We've got the air sampling systems. We've even got the design and control systems we can actually put in place for these buildings now. So if we think of it holistically, we can actually make the cities much better in the future. I think where you are, well, not where you are right now, Iyad, but they're thinking in the Middle East of cities of the future, and they're already starting to think about this. There's one or two coming along that's looking at this in a holistic environment. Now, they're looking, maybe they can afford to do this, but actually, if you think about it from a carrot and stick point of view, from a legislation and driver point of view, it's actually better for society as a whole. And John alluded to Ella's law. It's 2013 that she died. You know, the first human person in the UK to be have air pollution named as cause of death. But it actually took until 2022. So 9 years later, the Clean Air Act, or the Clean Air Bill, came into the UK, into Parliament. So it took a long time. So I think you know, you need that kind of both ends of the spectrum to start thinking about cities of the future, how we're going to design our cities of the future, and also how we're going to retrofit our existing cities that will actually be suitable for this paradigm shift we're talking about.
Richard, I'll just share.
Thanks, Richard.
10 seconds, Mitch, please. You know, when you have a traffic issue, you know, the conventional ways you think of widening the streets. You know, usually we think, you know, we want to 6 lanes, highways, and this way we're off the hook. Today we're talking about, let's promote cycling and walking. But how can you do that when anthropogenic emissions are on the rise? You know, I'm not going to walk and bike, you know, and you know, enjoy this outdoor environment when, you know, it's so polluted. I probably would like to go back and have this convenience of private mobility. Thank you. Mitch, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Iyad. I appreciate that. We're kind of getting close to the end here. I just wanted to, I do want to ask one more question of someone, and that's Jennifer. If you could implement one major change to improve IAQ in your city, what would it be?
Good question. I think my answer to that would be to mandate real-time air quality monitoring and control systems, but including the nanoparticles, because I don't believe that the ASHRAE 241 PM 2.5 goes far enough. We need public reporting in all our schools and our daycares and our workplaces and public buildings, including the hospital waiting rooms that we spend a lot of time in these days. And why I say this is because we need the transparency and awareness of real-time data, which would empower residents and students and businesses to take action. Policy enforcement, if we could get the government and businesses to apply this, they would be held accountable for maintaining healthy indoor air quality in these buildings with this reporting. And also health interventions. So, individuals with asthma or respiratory conditions could take precautions based on the indoor air quality data. And then also data-driven improvements, so the cities can use this indoor air quality data to improve ventilation upgrades in the most affected areas. So and this technology is available today. So we must be effectively presenting this to educate decision makers.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Well, we're kind of coming up on the end here, so what I would like to do is to have some closing statements from each person. And Nick, would you give us some closing statement, please?
Yes, I think that there's a lot that's been said here, and indoor air quality, I'm sure other people are going to say this, it's a right. It's a right for everybody. And we do understand the costs associated to indoor air quality. But as said on my tag over here, when we breathe cleaner air, we unlock a lot of potential, and not only for a better life, but also improving the environment that we're not necessarily focusing on today. I'm going to leave it at that because I know we're running late here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Nick. Suzanne,
Well,
do you have a closing statement? Yes.
Today, and I hope we're going to have many more to this topic. I would end with saying, to become sustainable, we have to be responsible. And I would like to highlight two things. Think about the things that you can do on an individual level. Like, can I walk to the supermarket instead of driving my car? Can I talk to my dentist about the clean air and filtration that they have installed? Can I talk to my friends about what they have in their cars in terms of filtration? And the other thing is, what can organizations do? Environmental, social governance, corporate social responsibility, all these are terms that companies are trying to promote. The question is, how can we, this is a framework, but what can we really do to act? What can companies and organizations on their local level do? On one hand, within the organizations and companies, what can I do to make the workplace for my employees better? And the other thing is, what can I do in my society, in the town that the company is, in the region the company is? What can we do to sponsor something, let's say schools, kindergartens, elderly homes? And what can we do to influence, especially us in the filtration industry? What can we do to talk to and influence policy in the city? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Susanna. John, do you have comments on that?
Yeah,
Last
please.
comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose my kind of parting comment for the group is, if you think about a healthcare delivery on a spectrum, you've got a red end and you've got a green end. At the very strong red end, you've got emergency surgery, emergency rooms, surgeons, which is where I spent my clinical career. And as you kind of come down that spectrum, you've got your general practitioner and then your nurse. As you come more and more to the green end, you're talking about exercise coaches, your physiotherapy, your nutritional, your mindfulness coach, and you're getting more and more less red medical, more green health and well-being. And I really believe you keep going down that spectrum, that continuum, you will come to people who design our cities, our buildings, our indoor environment, our healthy indoor air. And I think it's I'm not trying to make everybody in this call or this panel into a doctor, but I do want you to have that paradigm shift, that breakthrough thinking that you are now part of the health and well-being conversation. And it's just as important to make sure we get the green end of the spectrum right for healthy public health as it is we spend the 4 trillion on the red end where we're treating people after they become sick.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Jennifer, do you have a closing statement?
Thank you. I think my closing statement would be, with global challenges like pandemics and climate change, wildfires, increasing urbanization, air quality is more important than ever, right? So the crucial time now is to educate filtration specialists, as demand for clean, safe indoor air is only growing. By investing in training and innovation now, filtration professionals can be at the forefront of the next wave of indoor air quality solutions, helping businesses and schools and healthcare facilities create healthier environments. And with the economic conditions improved, those who are already skilled in the latest filtration technologies will be in the best position to lead the industry. So WIF offers these courses, of which I took, and Mitch has mentioned them earlier. So please reach out to WFI for detailed information. I think better times are ahead of us, and those who prepare now will be the ones shaping the future of our indoor air quality. I myself will be upgrading my education by taking the A1 filtration course. So that's my comments.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Let's see, Richard.
Thanks, Mitch. I think just to close, I think we're all going to be living in closer proximity to each other going forward. We're going from 8 to 10 billion people on the planet in the next 20 years. And those people are going to be breathing the same air. And improving air quality for us all, indoor air quality especially, is going to be that massive shift we're going to have to move towards. I think John said it earlier with that's joined up thinking. I think that mind shift will have to come, and I think it's also a huge shift in terms of system thinking and in building thinking. And I think it's got a huge benefit to our well-being, our society, and our health to have better air quality. People also would like to live in cities that are clean, that have fresh air, etc. So I think once, governments, organizations, etc., wake up to that, and also companies jump on that scenario to say, well, actually, it's not a cost. We can actually make money out of this as well. That's the big mind shift that will take place. So I think right now, people are thinking of it as a cost. Maybe they have to add to schools and things like this. It's actually a benefit, actually, in the future. So that's my closing statement.
It's good. Great, Richard. And Iyad, of course, we need a closing statement from you.
Thank you, Mitch. Let me first of all extend my sincere appreciation to you to, excellent job you've done today to navigate through the brilliant minds we have today. As Nick always says, we all, walk away from this filtration hour with a lot of insights. I hope the audience did too. A very quick comment on what Richard has said. And I think that will be my message today. System thinking. We need system thinking, but let me remind you, system thinking needs system thinkers. We need social change. We cannot sit down and dictate to governments what they're going to do and how they have to avail fresh air quality and subsidize air filtration acquisitions. It's a collective sort of homework we have to do. It's not just us, and it's not just the government. Communities will have to do their fair share of compromise, challenges to face and changes to make to bring things forward. Technologies are there, they're available, as Dr. John has said, and many of you have said. It's just a matter of collecting everything on the same page. It seems that we have individual efforts. They have not capitalized on what we're capable of. The last message before we pass it on to Mitch is, let's focus on what we're becoming tomorrow as an environment, as a planet, as humanity, rather than what we're getting immediately today. And this is how we can collectively shape the sustainability story humanity is trying to shape. Back to you, Mitch. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Iyad. Now, I want to thank all of our participants, all our panelists, and all of our audience for attending this filtration hour. I think this was very good and very educational. But I also like to remind everybody that we do have these courses on a continuing basis. Our next one is Air Quality Governance on April 17th at the same time. I would also like to remind everybody of our opening CFSS 2025 ceremony on March 11th with Global Filtration Market Trends and Opportunities, where we'll have a host of experts there as well. And I would also like you to check out these topics that are highlighted here as they relate to today's these courses as they relate to today's topics. Now, we hope you take advantage of our prestigious CFSS 2025 program to accelerate your career and business. I would like to acknowledge all of our WFI members. Without them, this program couldn't exist. And I really appreciate all our panelists for attending. And thank you very much for your attendance. Bye-bye.